Hi everyone, my name's Matt Cowley. I'm the Chief Executive of the Tauranga Chamber of Commerce. Just want to thank Paul Blair, who's the CEO of Infrastructure New Zealand, for joining us today. Look, we'll usually kick straight into it, as I know there will be a lot of questions that we want to get through, and you've got this great presentation that we'd love to share. How about we just go straight into it, and I'll let you introduce yourself and share your presentation.
Sure. Thanks for the welcome, Matt, and good morning, Tauranga. So, like I said, Paul Blair. I'm a reasonably new CEO of Infrastructure New Zealand. Started in about August last year. Was on the board for about 4 years, and I'm a 25-year banker. So I'm not an engineer. I'm like most things, based up in Auckland. And what I'm going to do is probably do about 15 minutes of explaining to you our vision for how we could reform the way that local government and our regions work together to deliver for the people of the wider bay, and then also contribute to our national goals. So I'll do that, and then we can get into more Q&A, which is generally of more value to people. So if I can share screen here, here we go, right. So you can see that, Matt, I think?
Yes,
okay,
yes,
so,
that's great.
So on our website, and www.infrastructure.org.nz, so Infrastructure New Zealand, this is our approach to building regions. So as I said, it's a vision for how we might reform local government, the planning law that gives you the resource consents to allow you to grow, and what funding reform might need to come in behind that in order to make it happen. So very small logos, but to give you a bit of an idea, there's 140 corporate members. We've got a whole heap of breadth. So if you can see on the left-hand side, it's construction, engineering, law, banking, finance, professional services, investment, transport, local government. Really big, wide range, because if you think about building, the Tauranga Harbour Bridge, it takes a huge collaboration of a lot of people to bring this to light. And so what we describe ourselves as is really a connector. We are about systems and bringing this really complex system together to deliver infrastructure, and I'll explain what and why. Tauranga City Council is a good member of ours, and one of the reasons I'm doing this. So our vision is that all New Zealanders enjoy the benefits of world-class infrastructure. I deliberately don't define infrastructure because, like in any good vision, it means different things to different people. Some people think infrastructure is just roads or rail or housing, but it goes all the way through in some people's minds to sort of green infrastructure, as was discussed in the budget. It really is, what is the physical platform that we need in order to build a better life for New Zealand? And that comes through in the wellbeing framework. So we've been around for about 15 years. We go offshore every year. We take a delegation and we look at world best practice. And so in order to achieve world-class infrastructure, you need these 5 things. 4 of them and it fails. You have to have all 5 of these. But the first and most important is to start with a vision of what you want to achieve. So without a vision, really all roads are the same. You just scatter your efforts. And then critically, how are you going to lead it and how are you going to govern that system? So this could be a model for a project. It could be a model for a vertical, a sector, for example, housing, or it could even be used to apply to the way that infrastructure works at a country or a region level. So the second thing is, once you know what you want to achieve, the Bay of Awesomeness or something like that, you then go and you get a long-term integrated plan. And this is where New Zealand often falls down, is that we fall to our silos. So the key is finding a way that we integrate that, and that comes back again to how well it's led and governed. Number 3 is around funding and financing, and I'll just pause on that. So the simplest analogy is funding is the income that you get, your salary, for example. Financing is you going and getting a mortgage to buy an asset or having equity. So the world is awash with financing that wants to invest in infrastructure. The problem in New Zealand is that, as I'll show, it's predominantly government has not released the funding to enable us to finance and buy these infrastructure outcomes. The next bit, number 4, is what are the laws and the regulation, and then critically, what are the culture and incentives that get us this system? So we've tended to over-regulate and undergo with the behavioural economics that people do what they get rewarded for. So a lot of the frustrations that you have, you want to just, and I'll come back to local government later on, you want to just understand what the incentives in that system are and why you're getting those behaviours. The fifth one is, how about the people that we've got to deliver it, and what sort of capacity and capability have they got? This is where innovation comes in. And I should say that all of this system is all about people. Infrastructure is not about building roads for roads' sake, nor is it about anything else other than figuring out what are people's needs and what tools do we need to go and get it. Infrastructure can deliver that, so can funding, so can skills and training, which is why we've got a policy criteria of wanting to achieve a vision for New Zealand, because infrastructure is one of those tools to deliver it. So this is our 5 policy priorities in the vertical, so national vision. So last week I ran a thing called Vision Week. If you had a look at www.visionweek.co.nz, we reached between 1 and 1.3 million Kiwis last year, different ideas. Given that we've had COVID and we've got this $20 billion fund, what do we want to be so that we can invest that $20 billion in a coordinated way and use the chance to be bold and to actually reset for a more sustainable, inclusive future that addresses some of our past problems, but for once goes after some of the huge opportunities we've got in New Zealand. The other 3 areas are around housing, mobility, which is really transport or connecting people, and water. Those are the 3 critical infrastructure areas we see as failing in New Zealand. There are others that are failing, but those are the top 3 just because we're sticking with 5, right? Those themes that run all the way through is that climate resilience is going to make COVID look like a bit of a warm-up event. We haven't adjusted to that yet, and we really need to build systems that are agile and able to respond. Future-proofing our industry is about best practice. It's about having thought leadership from different genders, age, voices. It's about long-term procurement and bringing that best practice from the rest of the world back in. A core reason that I hope that you guys are here is that our communities should have more of a say in driving what infrastructure they need locally to represent them. We've got ourselves to a bit of a stage where we go, oh, I don't really think I can get this done locally. Wellington might not come in and save me, so I just sort of let it go. And as a result, people's voices are not being heard in the infrastructure that they need. Innovation is critical, and particularly after COVID, we need to change the way that we're doing things. And the last one, but really critical, is that going in with a mindset and a framework to collaborate, because in a really complex and fast-moving world, the answer is a partnership. The difficulty is those things take longer and they require leadership. So that's what we do. So now this is, no one else has sort of got this chart, but this on the left-hand side here shows what we've got. In New Zealand, we've got just over $300 billion worth of infrastructure assets. 137 billion of that, or just over 40%, is with central government. 114 billion is with local government, just under 40%. And the private sector's got the remaining 20-odd% sitting there. Now, what we've done is we've put a bit of a traffic light system against that. And if you just look at the red, amber and green on that, you'll see that the private sector is doing pretty damn well. And the reason that we mark that as going well is it's got independent governance. Politics are not a part of that. They've got a direct relationship with their customer. They tend to have a revenue stream that enables them to do this. They do long-term planning, and they're in a fiercely competitive market, whether that's regulated or not. When we get into local and central, we're a much more mixed bag. And the key thing I wanted to call out is the fundamental difference in the central government and local government space, that, you know, this part of the pie here is 80%. So 80% of New Zealand's infrastructure is provided by government. First of all, that's quite a high percentage compared to the rest of the world. Our Treasury manual says that using the public purse should be the last alternative, but it's clearly not, because we're using this a lot more than countries like the UK or others. And also the private sector is providing it pretty damn well. The interesting thing is that in terms of taxes and rates in New Zealand, if that's a pie of 100, it is roughly 100 million. on 110 million. It's 90-10, the split between central government and local government. So I was using these figures with Anne and Matt before, but for the 5 million Kiwis we've got, those 5 million Kiwis pay $1,125 to their local council, and they pay that after tax, and they really hate it, and they bitch and they moan, and I'm sure we've got some business folk on there that hate their commercial rates. But it needs to be put in context with the $15,250 that's going in GST, corporate tax, and other things that go without you really seeing them. And so when you look at the ratio that roughly central and local are in the same sort of space and providing you with the facilities that you need to run your business, and it's a 90-10 split, I want you to think hard about who should be held accountable if the infrastructure that's in front of you is not performing the way that you want it to. Moving on from that, what I'm here to talk about is effectively what's known overseas as a regional deal. At our conference last year, which is just down the road in Rotorua, we had 720 delegates on what we call building regions. A regional deal, I'll explain it later, effectively says, rather than 90-10, we'll collect the taxes in Wellington and we'll recycle some of them to a local region that organises itself around a plan that delivers for local, regional and national needs. So rather than 90-10, maybe it's 85-15 or 80-20 or something. But you pay for performance and you pay for capability and capacity. So you want this managed well. I'll explain it later on. But of our 720 people, 98% supported this. For context, Australia has 13 of these city or regional deals going at the moment. It's a very common way of partnering between different levels of government. 93% also supported more local government powers, believe it or not. So just sort of going quickly through what the problem is. People do what they get incentivized for. So the Public Finance Act here, I'm old enough that when I was 12, Muldoon failed to hand over the keys to a bankrupt country. We then deregulated everything at enormous pain to everyone in this country. And we very much said government should stay out of doing anything in the market. It should be very, very small and it should be hands off. We then put in the Public Finance Act, which allows us to balance the books. But what we've got to is we balance the books. So if we've got $100 and we say we've got 15 outcomes we're trying to get, they go, sorry, you can only get 5 outcomes for that. And so we miss out on 10. The way other countries do this is they go, what outcomes do our people need? They need 15 outcomes. And then they innovate to find a different way to do it. They go to their people and say, we need these extra 10 incomes. How about a new tax? Or how about we sell assets? Or how about we get the private sector to do it? And what that means is that you get a government of possibility, not with a dearth and a sort of a negative mindset based on the dollars. Now, it's good business, and I'm a banker. It's very good business to balance the books. But that mindset constrains the enormous opportunities we've got. So growth flows to central. Remember that 90-10, if you build a house, the GST and the corporate tax and so on goes to Wellington. Centralised decision-making, they're not doing 10-year plans. So for that large chunk of infrastructure, that's not being done by Wellington. And planning tools often have local benefits but national costs and vice versa. So that's where the misalignment is there. Capability, I talked about the 90-10. So they've only got 10% of the revenue, but every square inch of New Zealand comes under the Resource Management Act, and that's with councils. Again, if you're a business person and I offered you the chance to go into a business where you could recover your costs, legislatively, you could only recover your costs, and you carried all of the risk on consenting a new development. So you have only downside and your peak upside is recovering your costs, you wouldn't go into there. Right? So it's not surprising, it's a pretty hard place to work. We don't have, our regional government is really considerably underfunded. It makes local government look well funded. It's really around a bit of transport and a bit of environmental planning, but without the tools. They're a sort of a cajoler of local government rather than an owner often. And then there's the short-term funding. So infrastructure is 10, 30, 100-year assets. So you need 10, 30, 100-year revenue streams in order to do that. We have an annual budget cycle. So we're doing pay-as-you-go for things that'll be around for a generation. And that doesn't work. It wouldn't work in your organisation either. And lastly, central government, because it's great. A lot of countries love our two-tier system, but no one is consistently judge and jury of government. So there's no upper house. We do have increasingly some things that I love, like the Productivity Commission, the Climate Change Commission, the Infrastructure Commission, which have independence, or the Office of the Auditor General, for example, that have independence of government and can hold them to account. But each one of those is a commission, and they're in silos. What I would love to see, and what Vision Week was about the idea of perhaps a wellbeing commission for all New Zealanders. A dashboard that says, this is what we're aiming for, and your job is to get there. You're running this social enterprise called Aotearoa, and it's your job to work with business and iwi and communities and local and anyone else internationally as well, to help us get there. It's not all you, but this is what we're aiming for. Let's aim for the moon and fall back, aim for the stars and fall back to the moon. Let's not just tinker around the edges. Our accountability is a bit unclear. It's privately, politicians will happily say to me that they're happy to have local government as a whipping dog. The Productivity Commission's report on local government calls them unfunded mandates. So they keep piling on another thing for them to do, and they don't give them the revenue. And 3-year electoral cycles, particularly when you've got local government elections in the middle of it, are a recipe for what we wanted back when we got rid of Muldoon, which was remove the ability for someone to just charge off in a direction we hate, but inadvertently put in systems that mean that we're in so centrist that you can't tell really much of a difference between left and right. And the 3-year cycle is actually designed for stability and stasis. And we live in a world of volatility and the need for agility. And, politics doesn't reward big bets in New Zealand, and arguably it shouldn't. But there are some things that government must intervene in, and our system doesn't allow for that. So I hope I'm not depressed, everyone, but it is useful to get a bit of a historical context about how we get to the fact that, we have appalling mental health, we have child poverty that doesn't work, that a resource consent could take you 3 years to get your deck built or something. How is this happening? It's happening because of a system approach that isn't working to be agile enough to deliver good outcomes for all Kiwis in an inclusive way. And not surprisingly, and this is local government's figure, we don't like them much, right? Yet local government New Zealand has a policy of localism, which comes from the New Zealand Initiative. Switzerland doesn't have a central government. It has 1,400 self-taxing cantons. So, this would be like Mātua saying, hey, I'm going to raise a local GST of this, and then having a different one with Pies Pa who raises a different GST and different offering. So it's like a competitive market for local government, runs Switzerland and does pretty well. I don't think Kiwis with that rating of local government are likely to move to 1,400 self-taxing cantons tomorrow. So I think what's the path in between, and that's what we're talking about today. So building regions. This is on our website. This is the report there. So we're talking about new revenue coming from Wellington into a regional partnership. Let's think of the wider bay, for example, rather than Tauranga City Council, Western Bay Regional Council, etc. There's this term called a spatial plan, and the economists call it an economic geography. So if you live way down the line, closer to a Portuguese, you're probably still, for your major hip operation, going to come into Tauranga Hospital. You might also come in for jobs. You might come in to watch a Waikato game that somehow ends up at the Mount or something like that. So there's this idea of an economic geography. People don't live in local council areas that are arbitrary lines on a map. They live where the region, the rural feeds the city, and the city feeds the rural. So that needs to be self-determined, but it needs to be a sizable amount. Number 3 is a critical one. If you've heard of Standard & Poor's and their idea of a AAA debt rating, government's got this thing called an investor confidence rating, and it rates the capability of their key agencies. So NZTA is rated a C. That means they get a certain amount of delegated authority and ability to do things on their own bat. I think that the wider bay should get to a certain scale and then put themselves into that rating system. If they get a C, then they're going to get the same outcomes for that dollar that Grant Robertson gives to the Bay as gives to NZTA, but you do it together. The spatial plan needs to work for local people, iwi, communities, businesses that we got on this call. It needs to work for regional, and it needs to work for national. So it finally aligns people together. Certain things need regional scale and professional independent governance, and they are particularly water, ports, airports, and transport. You've got a fabulous port. It's a mixed ownership model. It's got independent governance. It's got a great relationship. There are some other ports that aren't so great in this country, and I'm not far away from some of them, right? And then there's further reform later on. So I'll whip through that later on. This is all available on our website. This is an idea, picking 10 regions, and you can see where the Bay of Plenty is there. Does Coromandel go with Waikato? How far do you go down? Do we have 6 regions? Do we have 18? To some extent, it doesn't matter, but that Bay figure that I've got there of 360 odd thousand, it needs to be of significant enough size to be able for Wellington to deal with 10 regions and not 78 local councils. That's one thing. The second thing is that it needs to have a sizable economic base so that we have an element of cross-subsidisation of poorer regions with wealthier regions. Cross-subsidisation is the core concept of local government. It's just doing it on a bigger scale for infrastructure. I point out that it doesn't do away with the 78 councils. Those are still there, and they're very, very important for community needs. Arguably, they're underdone for delivering for communities. And if we had a different government delivery model, then rather than Wellington deciding the Ministry of Social Development jobs needs of Tauranga from Wellington, it could be done more locally. And I'm sure that there would be an ability to deliver services locally that within a framework delivered more. So I used Waikato. I could equally slip Bay of Plenty in here. Imagine a regional partnership with a 2050 vision. Imagine local iwi and all of the mayors coming together and saying, hey, we're going to get together and we're going to deliver this wonderful vision for whatever it is that differentiates Bay of Plenty from Waikato's unique selling point, from Otago Southland's unique selling point, right? You create that spatial plan, like the Auckland plan, big joined up conversation done under urgency. You get a 30-year plan out of that. The special magic is that at the moment, when I did this, Crown could borrow money at 1.3% for 10 years. They just issued some 4-year bonds the other day at 0.4%. Money's never been cheaper to borrow. And you use that borrowing to gift it to this wider regional partnership. And the magic with that is that for your cash-strapped council, say Tauranga City Council, if they receive income of 100 million, they can borrow 2.5 times that because they've got this debt cap. So if you think of pump priming, this 100 million from the Crown allows 350 million to be invested in stuff that we've agreed to do together, right? So you're already getting benefits rather than yelling at each other. Infrastructure funding and financing, I won't go into that. It's a new tool that allows more dynamism to come into serviced land creation. Kāinga Ora have got all sorts of other powers. But the magic here is that it's about $50,000 per section to put pipes and roads in to get an infrastructure service lot. The magic happens when mums and dads go and build, and that's a very modest home, and that's an incredibly modest price. But they generate $2.1 billion worth of local spending on that 350 million. So you've got leverage upon leverage. And what that does is it generates $367 million for the Crown, just in GST. And right here, right now, when we're trying to protect jobs, of course, it protects jobs. It also generates personal and corporate taxes. But I'm just trying to keep it simple. 100 in, 367 out. Now, I acknowledge it might take 5 years, 7 years or something to sell those lots, but the point remains. And you can see that last one on the investor confidence rating that gives Crown the confidence to hold them to account within a ratings framework. It can't be project by project, which is one of the major failings of the way at the moment. It needs to be framework by framework, so that local ability to tailor to local needs within a competency framework is allowed for. The final one is because this is a 10-year grant of money, you can do 10-year procurement out the other side. So in Auckland, Watercare has just done a 10-year deal with Fletchers and Fulton Hogan on its water thing, its water procurement. It's aiming to get a 20% saving in procurement, 20% off the normal capital costs, plus they're making carbon savings and health and safety savings. So if you move out of pay as you go and into long-term procurement, 10% and perhaps as much as 20 is available. So when you walk your way through that, what that means is progress. And it's progress that works locally, it works regionally, and it works nationally. And it works by people coming together and changing the incentives so that we work together, we fund together, we deliver together, we govern together. When this was done in Australia, it led to local politicians having about a 70% approval rating, which is unheard of. Because what happened is if you wanted the hospital, you got it done, right? So there's huge potential in this, but we have to be bold, and I'm hoping that COVID has given us the chance to be bold. So as I said, this is the idea that what we want to do nationally matches what we do regionally, which matches what we do very much locally. We have a plan and a vision for where we want to go. That vision is national, it's also regional and local. And this gives us all a chance to participate in building a better Bay of Plenty, which builds a better New Zealand. So it's more than enough. I've stopped preaching at you, but I'm keen for any Q&A. I think you use the Q&A button rather than the chat, I presume. Over to you, Matt.
Yeah, look, thank you very much for that, Paul. You covered off a number of issues. I've got a few pages of notes, actually. So thanks for that. Look, and for those that are on the Zoom, you're welcome to either submit through the Q&A or the chat, either or, and we'll keep track of them. I've just got a few questions here. Obviously, it's hard to disagree with the top three priorities being housing, mobility being all of transport, and water. Water supply is going to be critical over the next 50, 100 years, over the lifetime of some of these major assets. But there was an absence of digital, and there's been a lot of talk about telecommunications, particularly for information poverty with a lot of rural areas that didn't get, haven't quite had the ultra-fast broadband rollout yet. So what are your thoughts on that?
Good question. So Productivity Commission came up with a report 2 weeks ago and said that successful small nations need to move their exports from, as a percentage of GDP, up to a 60 to 70% of GDP. We're at 30. And it said there's two areas that we can do to grow in New Zealand. One is around the primary sector and using tech within the primary sector. And the other was digital. And so that's the high level. The second thing is that in terms of that traffic light that I showed you, digital telco is actually definitely green in New Zealand. So we are in the top 10 in the world on independent surveys for what they call the triumvirate, which is the moving space between the cost of it, the accessibility of it, and the quality of it. So we're in the top 10 of 200 nations in the world for the quality of our digital and telco infrastructure. There's more to be done, and there's rural infill. There's also a massive opportunity for us to go from 4G to 5G, because our ultra-fast broadband rollout is world leading. And I don't think Kiwis quite know yet just how lucky we were. So 30% uptake in broadband, we're zooming now, we were all zooming all the way through it. That's because we have independent governance, independent revenue streams, fierce competition, delivering for the customer. So I think digital is a huge opportunity, but in the context of other things that are broken, you know, we've got $1.2 trillion worth of housing in New Zealand. 500,000 of those homes are 1-star quality. Our Building Act, a 5-star home under the Building Act would be 1-star or 2-star in any other country in the world. And it's a long answer, but just to put it in context, 1,600 Kiwis die every year from cold and damp homes. And that's in context with 22 people who died under COVID. So in relativity, digital is an enormous opportunity. We've got to fix some of our problems first as well.
Okay, yeah, so maybe we should approach the governance side of things, because there has been a lot of reviews into local government, how local government's funded, and whether that report went into enough detail or whether it was accepted by the governments of the time, and there have been a number of them. Why haven't we progressed down this conversation further or a lot faster? What's holding it up? Because this is important, but it's nothing new.
So one of the policy guys from Local Government New Zealand said that at least once every 10 years since the 1950s, we've held a Royal Commission or something or other else into local government. He came up with this great line and said, collectively, we've made 256 recommendations and we've implemented 3 since the 1950s. As I was saying to you beforehand, you and Anne and the others that I can see on this call are the voters that put in the legislation that puts in local government, which is currently failing. And until there is a change that the voters of New Zealand find it completely unacceptable to have to take a half-hour commute down Cameron Road for what should be a 5-minute commute, or they realise that their drinking water is polluting our harbours, or they realise that it's going to take 3 years to get a building consent because of all those other reasons. Until the voters of New Zealand kick up a stink about changing local government, it won't happen.
Okay. Let's talk about the infrastructure sector as well. What is their capacity to be able to take on what will possibly be a rather large program over the next 5, maybe 10 years?
Yeah, so infrastructure is quite lucky. It's one of the sectors that is going to grow, and that's because internationally it's been proven by heaps of studies that infrastructure, because it broadly benefits a whole section of the economy, is one of the best ways that you can re-stimulate and grow. Capacity is a chicken and egg issue. We have started and stopped and not gone on, and started and stopped and not gone on for years and years and years in infrastructure. And so the critical thing is that you actually have a long-term and certain pipeline. And, you know, it's wonderful, for example, that we've got this $3 billion coming in shovel-ready projects. But it's a month today, I think, since the budget. And we don't have any idea what those are. It might be next week, it might be the following week. But I'm well aware that, like the businesses on this call, you know, there could be 10, 15% job losses in a week, right? So I think that the government is struggling with getting the difference between announcing it and getting dollars flowing into businesses' hands, and that's unfortunate. They need that long-term pipeline in order to lift the capacity. If the certainty of funding and the pipeline is there, so will the capacity be.
And that's the long-term integrated planning part of your argument, with the different ministries having an integrated plan together with local government, with the business community as well. Okay, well noted. Just quickly, as part of the long-term infrastructure connected integrated planning, your thoughts on the future of Ports of Auckland and what that could mean for the Bay of Plenty and potentially Waikato region?
Do you want me to plead the fifth on that, or actually tell you what I think? I think I don't think that the studies were done properly. I don't think they engaged the right people. I think they engaged Port of Tauranga for 1 half-hour discussion. They might have done the same for Auckland. I think that when you're doing anything with infrastructure, you've got to first start with, what is my problem statement or what is my opportunity statement? And I think that the problem or the opportunity was perhaps more politically aligned than it was business aligned or outcomes aligned. So I think that it is an interesting one, though, because we don't have a national port strategy. And the reason we don't have one is because of tensions between central and local. Again, I go back to, with incentives, all things are possible. With sticks, you just get to stasis, delay, and nothing happening. You know, there is no single solution to the ports for me. Tauranga has further capacity, but there will be reverse sensitivity in Tauranga. It will require another Kaimai tunnel. It'll probably require a tunnel for residents, I would say, to get that done. That will require a significant environmental impact, and it's a pretty narrow harbour there next to the mount as well, right? That tidal flow. So there is more capacity there, but it's not the capacity we need. The Firth of Thames is, I think, potentially an excellent spot, but it has huge environmental concerns. I think that if iwi, particularly Tainui, who have an inland port, were to jump on board with that, that might make it a significantly more attractive option. Northport has straight open exposure to some seas and some swells. It's going to cause some issues there. It's also got a very small footprint. I really doubt the carbon things they talk about in terms of needing the highway and the rail. And I'm just going to finish by saying that the best infrastructure you ever build is the infrastructure that you don't build, because you optimize what you've already got. And particularly in a sustainability and carbon world, there is, if we collaborated between the ports that we have, and we already have too many ports in New Zealand, and I'm not talking Auckland and so on, if we had an environment that we collaborated rather than competed and held up for local body reasons, legislation is a barrier to doing what's right for all of New Zealand. The answer is absolutely there, but the interests that are at play aren't going to be told what to do by someone. They should be incentivized to do the right thing.
Great. Okay. Look, one final question from me. In terms of integration, in terms of legislation being an enabler rather than an impediment, the Resource Management Act, they're proposing to split urban growth development with the natural resource management. In terms of integration, is that the right approach or the wrong approach from your
So I haven't seen that they're looking at, I mean, that's one of the options that they're considering in the Tony Randerson review. So there's a big holistic review of the resource management system, of which the Resource Management Act is a part. But what David Parker announced the other day was the fast tracking of 11 designated projects, and then a sort of a channel for local government, central government and private capital to come in and go through the fast track. And it also allowed NZTA and KiwiRail to sort of self-designate minor maintenance type things. So that's the fast track legislation. That's a stopgap for 2 years. The critical need is to look at that whole system, which goes to the piece about, you know, the business model for councils only recovering costs and having all of the downside. If any of your members have ever travelled to the States, the local mayor goes and welcomes businesses with open arms. It welcomes new people. And the reason for that is they get taxes. If you grow and if you bring growth in, then you get rewarded. Until we put a model in that reflects that, we won't achieve our potential.
Okay, yeah, no, that's great. And you certainly highlighted the incentives part, the laws, incentives, and culture in your fourth tier of your cycle circle. Look, thank you very much. You've given us incredible food for thought. I think we might wrap it up there.
That's fine.
Particularly as Tauranga City Council is reviewing its revised draft budget, and we're now understanding the rationale for perhaps why they're wanting to change the residential and commercial targeted, the commercial rates. And the next piece of this puzzle will be our follow-up session with the Tauranga City Council CFO and their General Manager of Strategy and Growth, Christine Jones and Paul Davidson, to be able to find out, perhaps give a local perspective, local real-time perspective of some of the major issues that you're talking about. Look, thank you very much, Paul.
No problems. Say hi to them from me. I know them both very well, and that letter that I provided to you was written with them, so they're well across all of this.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for everyone that's watched this, and we'll keep in touch. Thank you.